Well, here we are again. Today I'm going to talk about something you may have experienced, but don't actually know how to quantify and what to do about it. I'm going to talk about time banditry. That's right, banditry. Bandit takes things away from you, usually by force. Now, time banditry has always been a significant issue since human beings left the veldt and set up cities. Now, obviously, First Nations people around the globe, time is regulated by sunrise and sunset, and the struggle to satisfy basic human needs. Once people set up communities which didn't rely on the subsistence economy, we had the situation where people's labour became the way in which they were able to survive in that community. So time banditry has been a real issue since the Industrial Revolution. Now, when the enclosures happened in England and people were forced off common lands which allowed them to survive, and forced into the cities to become fodder for the machine age, what happened is that most of their time was spent working for employers for basically a subsistence. And many people actually lived, especially children, lived in the factories. Now, during the 19th century, through reform movements and revolutionary movements, we saw the idea of time being fundamental in terms of struggles. And it's no accident that the slogan for the 8-hour day was 8-hour work, 8-hour rest and 8-hour play. Because people understood that wage slavery in its most extreme form really didn't assist them in any way. So it's interesting that in Australia, that 8-hour struggle, that's an 8-hour struggle per day, but a 6-day week, was spearheaded by stonemasons, who were skilled workers who were required to build the infrastructure for the new colony. Yes, our friends, the wind is now taking over, but that's all right. So, infrastructure of the new colony. So in 1855, first in Sydney and a few weeks later in Melbourne, the stonemasons won the 8-hour day. It wasn't until the 1880s and 1890s in Australia that semi-skilled and unskilled workers also won the 8-hour day. Now, we have seen during the second half of the 20th century that working hours were reduced for most people, and it was not unusual for one bread earner to be able to support a family on 8 hours work a day for a 5-day 40-hour week. Enters the digital revolution. That's right, the digital revolution. The digital revolution was sold to us as a way that we would be able to decrease working hours and have more time to pursue interests, more time to volunteer, more time to pursue interests regarding leisure time, more time to spend with children and family and friends. But unfortunately, the digital revolution, like the Industrial Revolution 2 centuries ago, has now stolen time. Time banditry has become a significant part of everyday life. We now have the ridiculous situation where we have large corporations making hundreds of millions of dollars selling pre-prepared food to people because they are time poor. It was expected the digital revolution would free us from the day-to-day issues, day-to-day things we needed to do in order to survive, but it hasn't. What the digital revolution has done is given bureaucracy and the employer the capacity to not only dominate our activities but to actually control every minute of our waking hours. I'll tackle the issue of bureaucracy first. We were told the digital revolution would make things easier. You press a button and hey presto, you can do your banking. Hey presto, you can use your phone to pay a bill. And although there is a convenience factor, the problem is that when things go wrong, it can take hours and hours and hours and days and even weeks to rectify that issue, and things go wrong constantly. How many times have I been in a bank and I've seen people come in who have issues regarding the digitalisation of the financial sector, and they're given a phone number and told to ring that phone number, and that phone never rings. Nobody ever answers it, and when it's eventually answered, it's somebody on the other side of the globe on a pittance who somehow has to resolve your issue. The other issue with this convenience is the cost. The cost of actually doing things which in the past was not included. The percentage of each transaction, and the fact that at the end of the month or the end of the week you need to trawl through everything to see whether things are in order. Then when you talk about bureaucracy, dealing with a state government department or a Commonwealth department or even a local council has for many people become a nightmare. Now the digital revolution has become almost universal. People who have not accepted the limitations of the digital revolution are ostracised and marginalised and spend their time trying to pay simple things like a bill. So in many regards, as far as the bureaucracy is concerned, the illusory savings of time that would occur by accepting the digital revolution in all its forms has been totally illusory for a significant number of people. It may not be illusory for somebody who has a personal assistant or a secretary to actually resolve the issues, but it is illusory, the time factor, for the great majority of people. Totally illusory. But more importantly, we now have people who are hostages to employers. The changes in the workplace relationship and the introduction of short-term contracts for so many people in this country, whether they're a traditional white collar or not, means that people are totally insecure as far as their long-term future is concerned. And that insecurity can continue for decades. If you have to rely on short-term after short-term contract in order to obtain a wage, obtain a mechanism by which you can live, well then it's you versus an employer. Whether it's an employer that employs half a dozen people or an employer that employs 100,000 people, the fact is your financial future, your viability in terms of being able to deal with the fluctuations of everyday life is totally dependent on you having that job. And that means people are inadvertently and inadvertently forced into be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, another SMS, another email, another telephone call. And the fact is that the working week is no longer 40 hours or 36 hours per week. The working hour has extended. And when the working hour has extended and you are dependent on an employer to pay your mortgage, your rent, your bills, then you acquiesce to those demands, because if you don't acquiesce to those demands, there's somebody else in the wings waiting for that particular job. So digitalisation has not liberated us from the mundane aspects of our existence. What it has done, it has increased the time that we need to spend in order to negotiate everyday issues, whether it's a passport. Frustration levels have become so extreme that we now have the situation that whenever you interact with somebody, whether it's via email, whether it's by telephone, whether it's a face-to-face interaction, you've got disembodied voices or disembodied signs saying aggressive, intolerant behaviour. Aggressive behaviour will not be tolerated because frustration levels have increased dramatically amongst people. They've increased dramatically because the time which they need for rest and leisure has been eaten away by technological innovations and legislation which now puts all the cards, all the aces, 4 aces, in the hands of the employer or the bureaucrat you are trying to deal with. And then when it comes to virtual platforms, we have the issue of algorithms making decisions regarding content with no human review and no mechanism via which you, as a consumer of that particular product, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or whatever you like, because those platforms are running on virtual empty. And with the introduction of so-called artificial intelligence, which is just another term to describe the expansion of the digital revolution to include algorithms, not human beings, we now find the situation where the frustration increases dramatically, because time banditry has now become a real issue. It became such a real issue that the federal government passed some innocuous legislation to protect some sections of the workforce from time banditry. But whether there's legislation in place or not, the fact is that the bureaucracy is increasingly at a distance from people who need to use that bureaucratic model in order to obtain basic information, basic papers which they need in order to survive. On top of that, we now have the situation of the so-called digital revolution in terms of a digital identity. And the fact is that if you transgress, even in the most minor manner, that transgression becomes part of your digital record. If you raise your voice, if you stand your ground, if you make demands. And the tragedy is the human beings you are dealing with are not those that make the decisions. They're not those that make the profits. They, like you, find themselves in the same situation. They are victims of time banditry. And those that make the decisions, those that make the profits, those that give you the bureaucratic runaround, those who make those essential decisions to go down that path, as we saw with robo-debt, are protected by a system which has become almost totally reliant on a digital platform to function. So one of the greatest threats we face as individuals, as families, as communities, and even as a nation state, is time banditry. When you don't have enough time to cook and you have to call on an outside agency to deliver prepaid food, you know there is something dramatically wrong. When you get home and you're so tired that you go straight to sleep, you know there is something wrong. When your security, your economic security, your financial security is dependent on non-human actors on a digital platform, you know things have gone far enough. Time banditry is a significant issue. It isn't as insignificant as most people think it is. When you find that your time is their time and you have no time or minimal time for human interaction, then you know there is something dramatically wrong with this society, especially when we're told the digital revolution and artificial intelligence is the road to personal freedom. It is not. It is the road to slavery. Digital slavery is just as significant as wage slavery and just as significant as real slavery before the abolition of slavery in the Western world. That is the situation we find ourselves in today. We are the victims of time bandits who use our time to enrich themselves at the expense of us, our family, our friends, our communities, and the nation.